Canada stands on the brink. After 10 long years of declining quality of life, skyrocketing housing costs, mass immigration, and eroding societal trust under Justin Trudeau's Liberals, the writing was on the wall. Trudeau's agonizingly long reign was coming to an end. Canadians had had enough, and by January 2025, traditional Liberal strongholds like the Atlantic provinces and the Greater Toronto Area began overwhelmingly favoring the Conservatives in the polls. With both internal and external support in freefall, Trudeau was forced to step down as Prime Minister, triggering a rushed internal vote among Liberal Party members. The candidate who emerged as the new Prime Minister? Mark Carney. A virtual unknown outside of politics nerds, Carney was a lifelong technocrat who had never held elected office. Instead, he spent over a decade as the governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. His appointment came at a pivotal moment, just as populist conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was on track for a landslide victory. Had Poilievre secured that victory, it would have meant the end of Trudeau's disastrous carbon tax, a significant reduction in Canada's record-high immigration levels from 400,000 to 250,000 annually, tax cuts for struggling Canadians, and reversing restrictions crippling Western energy development. However, the projected landslide now looks like a toss-up. The insider coup to oust Trudeau for Carney has dramatically shifted polling numbers, putting the two parties neck and neck. Despite a decade of rapid decline, Canadians now appear willing to forgive the very party responsible for it and elect its hand-picked successor, Mark Carney. But who exactly is Mark Carney? Is he a real alternative to Trudeau, or merely a figurehead appointed to push the same disastrous policies? What can his past tell us about his leadership style? And given the stakes, could this be the most important election in Canadian history? To answer these questions, we'll need to take a closer look at Carney's career and personal history. One thing immediately pops up. Carney is the quintessential bureaucrat. He lives, breathes, and sleeps bureaucracy, excelling at navigating the internal politics of large organizations. It's no surprise then that he became the first non-British citizen to lead the Bank of England. However, his tenure was far from stellar. British MP Pat McFadden famously labeled him as an unreliable boyfriend for his mixed signals on future interest rate decisions. Furthermore, he broke with tradition by meddling in politics, publicly opposing Brexit and refusing to accept the result once it had passed. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that despite his poor performance as England's top central banker, he was hand-picked to lead Canada's Liberal Party. There exists a certain archetype that rises to the top of organizations, despite never accomplishing much. They master the art of positioning themselves as the ideal candidate for promotion, seemingly failing upward. Kamala Harris is often cited as an example of this phenomenon. Mark Carney is another. At first glance, these two have little in common. However, they share a critical trait: a complete inability to connect with everyday working people. Look at this clip of Carney greeting a group of blue-collar workers before a speech in Edmonton. He approaches them with his hands in his pockets, makes no attempt to greet them, and barely acknowledges their presence. To Carney, they are little more than props for a staged photo op. While this is merely a few seconds of video, it represents an attitude of aloofness that has characterized his entire career. The same detachment is evident in his media appearances, where he acts impatient or dismissive. Carney views himself as an elite, above greeting mere construction workers, above answering bothersome media questions. He's too important for such trivialities. After all, he held a senior position at Goldman Sachs. He governed both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He was handpicked to be Prime Minister of Canada, for God's sake. His arrogance mirrors that of European elites, like European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen or French President Emmanuel Macron, a group with whom Carney undoubtedly sees himself a member. To them, the average citizen is an inconvenience, existing only to serve elite technocratic agendas, a peon to be taxed and dictated to without making too much noise. Contrast that with his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, a man who, for all his faults, at least made an effort to relate to ordinary Canadians, engaging with the public and speaking passionately, whether genuine or not. Now that we've established who Carney is, why was he chosen to lead the Liberal Party? Or, more specifically, why would the party of progressivism, climate action, feminism, and mass immigration select a former central banker and Goldman Sachs alum as their prime minister? The answer comes in two parts. First, the progressive agenda of the past decade, largely driven by Justin Trudeau, was an anomaly for the Liberal Party. Historically, the party leaned more centrist, with leaders like Jean Chrétien and Lester B. Pearson representing a balanced, middle-of-the-road approach. Second, today's Liberal Party draws its core support from two primary demographics: Canadians over 60 and women. Take a look at this chart illustrating party support by age group. In every age bracket except 60 and up, Conservative support outpaces the Liberals. Surprisingly, the highest support for Conservatives comes from the youngest cohort, those aged 18 to 29. This trend is the opposite of what you typically see in Western liberal democracies, where younger voters skew left-wing and older voters skew heavily conservative. In essence, the political landscape in Canada has become a generational battle. Younger voters demand change through a conservative government, while older generations fight to preserve the progressive status quo. The explanation for this is quite simple. The older generation knows who's buttering their bread. Despite its progressive veil, the Liberal Party of Canada has unequivocally become the party of wealthy, boomer homeowners. And it's no surprise why. They champion mass immigration under the guise of a labor shortage, which drastically inflates housing demand, acting as a dividend for existing homeowners. Another key point is voter turnout. While younger Canadians may complain and share political content on social media, old people actually vote. To illustrate, in the 2021 general election, voter turnout among the 18 to 24 age group failed to crack 50%, whereas Canadians aged 65 to 74 turned out at an impressive 75%. This means that while the Liberals may only hold majority support among voters aged 55 and up, their turnout advantage gives them a disproportional impact on election results. At its core, this election comes down to a simple choice: maintaining Canada's current trajectory or making a drastic shift in the status quo. For Canadians under age 55, the choice is fairly simple. If you fall into this age group, you likely missed out on the era of affordable housing, stable wages, and the ability to coast through life on the skyrocketing equity of a home purchased for $200,000 in the 1990s, now valued at $2.2 million. While it's easy to blame boomers for supporting a system that has made life extraordinarily difficult for younger generations, it's important to consider their perspective. If you grew up in the 50s, 60s, or 70s, the promise that if you applied yourself and worked hard, you would be rewarded with a decent home, healthcare, and a pension was true. And in the minds of many older Canadians, the promise still holds true. They are retired or nearing retirement, have secure pensions, own multi-million-dollar homes, and aren't competing for poorly paid jobs with mass waves of incoming immigrants. So when Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre states that Canada is broken, to them it sounds like exaggerated Trump-style rabble-rousing. For them, the idea of a seasoned technocrat with strong fiscal credentials promising to maintain the status quo while dialing back some of Trudeau's progressive excesses is incredibly appealing. Part of, and perhaps central to maintaining the status quo, involves maintaining massive levels of immigration. In 2023 alone, the Liberal government brought in 1.2 million immigrants, representing an astounding 2.9% annual population increase. Unsurprisingly, this influx has caused housing costs to skyrocket nationwide and placed enormous stress on already crumbling healthcare, schooling, and social services. While mass immigration to Canada has been widely discussed, a lesser-known but critical development has now emerged: the Century Initiative. Founded by Dominic Barton and Mark Wiseman, both former executives at McKinsey and BlackRock, the Century Initiative is a lobby group with the explicit goal of increasing Canada's population to 100 million by 2100. The group was closely tied to the previous Liberal government, with former Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland even serving as an advisor. So when Mark Carney appointed Century Initiative co-founder Mark Wiseman as an advisor, the message couldn't have been clearer. The disastrous mass immigration policies of the last decade will continue, whether Canadians like it or not. For a calculated technocrat like Carney, this may have been a rare PR misstep. Although he has pledged to uphold Trudeau's modest immigration cuts, from 500,000 to 395,000 new permanent residents in 2025, the optics of appointing the guy who wants to more than double Canada's population cast serious doubt on his true intentions. This brings us to a topic that unfortunately will play a major role in the upcoming election: the Trump card. President Trump's recent hostility towards Canada, through trade tariffs and social media smack talk about making Canada the 51st state, has reignited a long-dormant sense of Canadian national pride. A country that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau once described as the world's first post-national state is now teeming with fervent nationalism. Canadians are proudly flying their flag, boycotting American products, flocking to grocery stores to buy Canadian, and even booing the US national anthem during hockey, baseball, and basketball games. Yet it wasn't draconian COVID measures, skyrocketing poverty, crime, homelessness, or a plummeting quality of life that triggered this surge of patriotic outrage. No, it was the loudmouth orange man south of the border.
So I think Canada is going to be a very serious contender to be our 51st state.
This wave of anti-American sentiment has played directly into the Liberals' hands at the expense of Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives. Poilievre's confrontational style and right-leaning politics have led many to view him as too Trumpian, a label that, while largely untrue, has turned off traditionally left-leaning Canadian voters. Never mind that Trump himself is largely indifferent to which party governs Canada. While it's true President Trump had a personal dislike for Trudeau, mockingly dubbing him the governor of America's 51st state. Now that he's gone, his rhetoric has since softened. Trump has even expressed a preference for dealing with the Liberals under Carney rather than a conservative government. In reality, Canada-US relations are unlikely to change significantly regardless of whether the Liberals or Conservatives win. But that doesn't mean the issue won't be a decisive factor in the election. Take a look at this chart showing Canadians' most important issues when voting. Among those aged 60 plus, dealing with Donald Trump has now surpassed the cost of living, housing affordability, and healthcare as the most important issue in the election. Notably, it's only the 60-plus group holding this view, and it shouldn't be surprising. This generation is the last one still getting their information from mainstream news networks like the CBC, which devote the majority of their airtime to stoking fears of Trumpian fascism taking over the globe. So, as Election Day approaches, Canadians face a stark choice. Continue down the path that led to a lost decade of stagnant incomes, soaring household debt, glacier-like economic growth, and rapidly declining quality of life. Or take an uncertain but necessary gamble to reverse the country's downward trajectory. Neither option is without risk, and therein lies the problem. Canadians, by nature, are far more risk-averse than their southern neighbors. Change brings fear of the unknown, while the status quo, no matter how difficult, is at least familiar. Let's hope Canadians dare to take that leap. Otherwise, the past decade may have been nothing more than a prelude to an even darker future. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and watching one of these two videos next.